Okay, Chair, we're live on YouTube. I'll hand over to you.
Thank you. Good evening and welcome to East Devon District Council's Leisure Strategy Delivery Forum meeting on the 11th of June 2025. I'm your Chair, Councillor Sam Hawkins, and I'd like to welcome anyone watching the meeting via the live streaming. May I remind members that the Code of Conduct applies throughout this meeting, and we also reserve the right to remove and disconnect any participant who is disrupting the meeting by whatever means. Please turn any telephone devices off or to silent. In the event of a break in the internet connection, please bear with us as we try to reconnect, but after 15 minutes, if we're not able to do so, the meeting will be considered adjourned and reconvene at a later date. If you wish to comment, please raise your electronic hand and wait to be called, and we will now start the meeting by doing a roll call of forum members here present.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Arnott. Councillor Bloxham.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Goodman.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Hawkins.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Hayward. Councillor Hookway.
Present, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Smith.
Present.
Thank you. And Councillor Toy. Okay, I can confirm that we'll call it, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Agenda item 1, apologies. On my list, I've got Councillor Fabian King and Councillor John Loudon. Have we had any others, Sarah?
Only from Councillor Barlow, I beg your pardon. He's not on the committee, but he sent his apologies anyway because he does usually attend.
Thank you. Agenda item 2, minutes of the previous meeting held on the 8th of April 2025. If there are any members with any comments on the minutes, please raise your electronic hand. I see no hands, so we can take them as agreed. Thank you. Agenda item 3, declarations of interest. Sarah, do you want to do this by roll call or just hands up?
If members can raise their electronic hand, please, if they've got any declarations, that'd be helpful. Thank you.
Don't see any hands. Oh, there, Councillor
Hookway.
Yes, thank you. Agenda item 12 from the Cranbrook Leisure Centre. I'll state that I'm a Devon County Councillor, just in case that is relevant. Thank you.
Thank you. Is that an effects NRI?
Oh, yes.
Hookway? Yeah, lovely. Thank you very much. That's noted.
Yes.
We have no others, Chair. I'll hand back to you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Agenda item 4, public speaking. There are no members registered to speak. Agenda item 5, matters of urgency. There are none. And agenda item 6, confidential exempt items. There are none. Agenda item 7, LED facilities and activities report for May 25. I'm handing over to Matt from LED, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everyone. As always, I won't dwell too much on the report. We'll kind of more focus on any questions people have. But I think on the whole, it's fairly positive. I think we touched on how the fantastic weather we've had has made things a little bit more challenging for people wanting to exercise inside. But then at the same time, you know, if you look at the lovely pictures we put up of the new courts at Coburg Fields, they do look better in the sun. So yeah, effectively, just any questions anyone might have, and also just to kind of thank everyone for, I suppose, the couple of those collaborative projects that we've managed to get across the line with the Coburg tennis courts and the new pool hoist as well at Exmouth Leisure Centre.
No, thanks, Matt. I was struggling to come up with a question because actually it's just a good report, I think, reflective of some good work that's been done in the last period, which is good to see. Councillor Goodman, did I see a hand?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for the report. Could you just clarify for me, with the Coburg Field tennis courts, were they actually resurfaced or were they repainted? And what sort of money did it cost the EDC if they were resurfaced? Because normally resurfaced tennis courts could take up to 4 to 5 weeks from start to finish. Because I live in Sidmouth, they were done very quickly. So I just asked the question, were they actually resurfaced or repainted?
Thank you for the question. I think they call it resurfacing, but I'm not a technical expert. So I believe they've obviously done the top layer. And from a cost point of view, it was funded through the LTA. So actually didn't cost EDVC kind of anything. They just assisted with the funding had to go in through East Devon, which took us a little bit of time kind of jumping through the relevant kind of legal hoops. But yeah, the funding came from the LTA. And then there's some further works that I believe have been confirmed for improving the access gate and allowing it to work with Club Spark, which I believe is coming through Section 106 funding.
So do you know how much the LTA gave us to do it?
I could get the figure to you.
Because I know how much tennis courts cost to resurface, and they're not cheap, and they take a long time. I think we just need to, when this says resurfacing is taking the top off and then resurfacing and flattening. That does take 5 to 6 weeks. This was done within a week. So I just asked the question because the report says it was resurfaced. Thank you. It looks great, by the way. I have to say, it really do look good.
The sunshine really helps in that photo.
Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah, it's great seeing the blue and the blue, isn't it?
Do you have any other questions? If not, I think we just thanks Matt obviously for your report and LED generally for the good work that's been done in this period. And then move on to, well, I think it's back to you, isn't it, for the KPI dashboard?
Yeah, correct. Thank you. So you'll have noticed this time around it looks slightly different, and that was based upon feedback, I think from some of the members within this committee, but from Mike as well. So we've got a few different things there. So you have got your kind of contract summary. So that's kind of what you're used to seeing, which kind of collates everything together. But on request, we've also now included ones for the individual sites, just to give you a bit more of an idea of kind of what's happening at different venues. And we also then created a document which helps to show kind of the total visits, the usage for last financial year against the previous. And then we've also now been able to provide Mike with live access to those dashboards, so he can kind of log in whenever he wants and kind of see some kind of in-month updates. There are certain elements that are updated at the end of the month rather than kind of 100% live, but yeah, most of it should be able to give Mike a good idea of what's going on.
No, I think that's it's really useful actually. I've seen that detail, and I think from ourselves we probably just need to work out what it exactly is. It's the really useful bits and which bits are more just being nosy, just to make sure we get the best detail out of it really for ourselves. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think just to kind of focus on a few key points and a few, I suppose, caveats to an extent. So obviously, looking at the total visits, so total visits for last financial year went up by about 2.25%. So that's a positive news story. Group X was a 3% increase. Gym was the real big winner at nearly 14.5% additional visits throughout the estate. Sports did go down by 5.75%, and swimming went down by about 1.8%. But one of the projects that we are carrying out at the moment is there is still some elements of uncertainty regarding some of the usage numbers for what we call kind of block group bookings. So, if you've got someone who is a lead booker who books a five-a-side game, say, at certain facilities, it is still being recorded as one attendance when there might have been 10 people playing. So we're just having to go through and look at some of the kind of manual intervention to make sure that the figures we're providing are kind of as true a representation of the visits as possible.
Yeah, that makes sense. Do we know, obviously it's only a small drop, swimming. I don't think there's been much change in available pools in the district in that year. Is there any, other than you're going to always get fluctuations, any observation why it might have reduced very slightly?
No, we've tried to have a look through it, and there were certain months where there was some reasonable amounts of drop off, and a lot of that, if I'm honest, again, comes down to school holidays and what the weather is doing. You know, it sounds absolutely terrible, but you know, if I drive in during an Easter holidays or a summer holidays and it's chucking it down with rain, I get quite excited because I know we're going to have a good day across our facilities. You know, if the sun's out, then obviously people then tend to find other things to do. So yeah, there's, you know, I think at that 1.8%, it's not anything that we're hugely concerned about, and that fluctuation is probably down to kind of
seasonality.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Thank you, Councillor Goodman.
Can I go to the positive, really, and understand, or are we able to understand why gym has gone up quite significantly during, you know, year on year? Because I always look at the positive and say, well, actually, we often look at, oh, well, that's gone down, but actually this has gone up. What have we done, and what's the reasons behind it? And can we learn? Did we market it differently? I don't know, because it's really good figures, and it really is great for EDC, because we want more people to be fit. And this is a great opportunity, James. And I thought it was a really good performance to go from 171 to 195. It's probably the highest figure we've had for a very long time, if ever we've beaten that figure. And I just think, is there any learnings from it, Matt?
I think there's various different things. You know, one of our biggest site by a long way is Exmouth Leisure Centre, and obviously there was a quite considerable investment in that kind of halfway through the last financial year, and that's yielded some quite positive results. I do think that you know, like I said, our marketing has been pretty solid, but also the introduction of a lot of our pulse sessions, our exercise referral, and some of our junior sessions as well, means that actually we're now attracting a wider demographic of users. And you know, a lot of that is because of the fact that, you know, we know that there is value there and that social value, but also with there being more and more competitors, you know, we need to make sure we're focusing on those things that we do that others don't, and those areas are definitely kind of covered in that.
I just wanted to listen to the reasons behind that, whether there's an opportunity for EDC LED to look at promoting this in the press, what we've achieved, because I think this is good stuff. And I just think sometimes we don't always look at the positives, and this is really positive news, which between us, we've managed to do. And I just wondered if there's something the PR people could do to promote what we've achieved in East Devon. It's a positive story.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like I said, we're more than happy to have a look at putting out some sort of press release or some sort of joint statement just to kind of highlight how successful the partnership has been over the last 12 months.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. I think, Mike, if you can follow up that one, that'd be good. Councillor Hookway.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I just wanted to talk about Broadclist Leisure Centre, which is the first one that comes up on there. Then, when we're talking of the group exercise, we're talking about 18 people turned up for group exercise at Broadclist. Is that what? Have I read that right?
Yeah. So there's a few, I suppose, complications that come up in these things. So typically, what happens is where our membership allows people to join any of the East Devon facilities and access any of the others, we don't actually run a group exercise program at Broadclist. So what it will be is probably a member or a few members at Broadclist who have been booking group exercise classes at their next nearest facility, probably somewhere like Ottery. But because of how what we call their primary site, so the site that they have signed up on and then chosen to be the one they use the most, it records it under a slightly different venue. On the whole, there's not a huge amount of that would go on, but somewhere like Broadclist, it kind of is highlighted there. And you'll notice, I think there was a couple of the dry side facilities, maybe Sidmouth Leisure Centre, where it mentioned about people swimming, which, yeah, again, there is no swimming pool there, so it's where members there are then using the pool across the other side.
Okay, yes, I did notice that, but I was just Broadclist does seem to be very quiet, doesn't it? That's
we won't argue with that.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much indeed. That's great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Smith.
Hi, I just want to check some of the data. I couldn't see any performance data for Axminster on the the dashboard data, but I may have missed that, so apologies. I also wondering, because I realise because both the hangar and Seaton are probably under the different section of LED, so that's why that data isn't in there. But I'm just wanted to check in, because obviously they are both gyms predominantly, aren't they? So I just wanted to check that that data wasn't necessarily then filtering into our gym data overall that we see for the total there, and then wouldn't factor for the increase that we saw year on year.
Yeah, no, two good questions. To answer the first one, so we use, just to complicate things, we use a single license. So we use a CRM system for managing all of our memberships. It's kind of a front of house. It manages memberships, and within Axminster, we share a license between the hangar and Axminster Leisure Centre. So what we can do is we can manually remove any of the data which is directly linked to Axminster Leisure Centre. But at the moment, the figures would have skewed it somewhat. And moving on to kind of your second question, because I suppose they're somewhat linked. I had a conversation before sharing this around with Mike, where we were saying, at some point, obviously, a decision was made to start reporting on the figures for Seaton and the hangar. Those we've now made the decision to be more sensible to remove those, so that yourselves are able to look at the East Devon leisure contract rather than some of the other facilities that are managed by us separately. So those figures are not included in that increase. So that, when we're talking about the gym increase, that is based upon the same kind of segment of sites, which is the East Devon leisure contract for both years.
Okay, thanks, Matt. I obviously think when we're able to extrapolate the Axminster sports hall usage, I think some of the successes that you've mentioned and seen, especially with kind of self-access, and I think you referenced pickleball last time as well. I think obviously we'll continue to see that be reflected in Axminster as well.
Yes, absolutely.
Great, thanks everyone. I can't see any other questions, but just picking up on the point that Mike's now got access, if there is any sort of different reporting or detail that would be helpful to members, I'm going to say, I see Mike slightly nodding. Contact Mike, he'll have a look, see what we can dig out and what could be helpful in making sure that we get it in the right format for everybody, and it will save Matt probably some time churning out info and going through these dashboards. But once again, thanks to Matt and Ollie going through the LED reports. Ollie, did you want to come in? Is your hand popped up?
Yes, it was just in reference to the Coburg tennis courts. While I was listening, I just dug out an email which was between us and the legal team at EDDC. The amount spent was approximately £40,000, and they say upgraded and repainted the outdoor court. So I think, to Matt's point, they probably improved the surface where it needed some touching up and mainly repainted. But it also includes new nets and installing access to ensure all year-round income and access, etc. So the total amount was approximately 40,000 quid that LTA funded on that project.
That's great. Thank you for that. Really helpful. So we'll move on then to agenda item 9, property and FM team update report. I believe I'm handing over to George for that one.
Thank you, Chair, and hello to everyone. I haven't been in one of these meetings for a while, but I'm back now. This is a simple report. You are familiar with the report. The only change to the report is that I'm trying to rationalize it by doing the basic analysis in quarters. So this report basically just deals with the fourth quarter from the last financial year and the first quarter. It's pretty much straightforward. It covers the activities that we've been doing in terms of planned maintenance and reactive maintenance, and it is all there. It is pretty much self-explanatory. So it covers where we are with compliance and all the projects that we've been involved at the centres. There is also a final point about capital expenditure and capital projects, and you could see there how much we've been spending in the leisure facilities over the last 3 years. I think it's something in the region of about £4 million that we have basically approved or allocated to spend on projects on the properties. Okay, so that's the report. If you have any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer them.
Thank you. If members got any questions on this one, I know it's something we've been tracking on a quarterly basis, and it's. I know George, you said you've tweaked how you're doing it now. I think that's a really helpful layout, so thank you for that. Seems to flow quite nicely, and you might have done it such a good job. It looks like you've even got away with not having any questions.
Good.
All as a forum we're being asked to do is note the content of that report. So if members are happy, then I think we can move on to the next item, which is item 10, a verbal update, Honiton Car Park. Mike, I think that's from you.
Thank you, Chair. I was having some problems with the camera earlier, so apologies for that. Just quickly on the Honiton Car Park, I know it's a topical issue at the moment. Essentially, the decision has been reached where we will work with LED and their proposal around working with an operator to implement a automatic number plate scheme into the car park. We are the main reason I think that, if you like, informed the decision is the fact that as a council, we ourselves cannot operate any sort of private automatic numbering system. The government doesn't allow councils to do that at the moment. So once that landscape was clarified and we understood what the position was with our own car parking team and their own commitments and resources, it was very evident that in order to change people's behaviour and address what are the current issues at the car park, mindful of the fact that the college are putting in an application for an all-weather pitch, and that will increase the amount of traffic in that area significantly, especially in the evenings and weekends. The decision, therefore, was to go with this, working with LED on the private operator model. We need to work through the implications of that. So it's something that I need to follow up with LED and their partner and understand what that actually means in terms of commitment, what it means in terms of the operator's investment, in terms of putting in gates, barriers, signage, and so on, because that's going to be a key part of the exercise, is making sure that the public are well informed of the change, because I think inevitably there will be some reaction to once it's implemented, because it tends to be an unforgiving system. If you're late, you're late, and it will penalise you. I mean, I think people's behaviour would change quite quickly after that. So the update really is that we've come to a consensus about the way forward. We need to now work with LED and the operator to make it happen. So what I propose to do, talking to the chair, is that once I have the detail, I'll submit that to the forum in more information in the report, so you can see what that actually looks like. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions for you. So Councillor Goodman first.
Yeah. When you said, Mike, about automatic recognition, this is because people are parking there for longer, I take it, and we want a system to make sure we deal with that and they go in a timely fashion. Is that right? Because when you said that councils cannot use automatic number recognition in terms of people putting their details in to pay for a car park, there's many councils using that system now. So I was a bit confused. Perhaps I misunderstood you, Mike.
Are you happy for me to respond? I think it comes down to the technical detail of what's involved in this case. The system that we're talking about here is that when somebody arrives at a site, they enter into the car park, they can go into the reception and type in their registration number.
Yeah.
And that will give them 2 hours.
Yeah.
Or the details to be finalised in order to carry out their activities and then
Yeah.
return to the car park without being penalised. So if they exceed their 2-hour limit, then that will be picked up by the barrier as they leave the car park.
Yeah.
So that in itself, if they leave and they're fined, the money will go to the private operator. It doesn't come to the council. So that whole mechanism and process is managed privately. And that will also, I think that is, if you like, the nub of a system that you see in other leisure centres around the country. It's the same principle applies, that there's an exemption, but if you exceed that exemption, then you will be caught up in the system. Now, the cost of it, etc., would need to be bottomed out. For example, I would imagine there might be an income, but that first year's income would be taken up by setting it up in the first place. So the cost of putting in the barriers, the cost of the signage, and the cost of putting in the vehicle registration software, all those kind of things. And then, therefore, you probably won't see a difference to an operator until the second year. So the things we need to bottom out are, if government legislation changes, what does that mean for the landscape? What does that mean for the council? And when does that flexibility come in? So if that flexibility comes in sooner, how does that interplay with the arrangements we have in place with the operator and the on-site? So, yeah, that is essentially, in a nutshell, the system as it works. If there's more information required, I'll try and make sure I cover that off in my next report on that someday. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Smith.
If you can come to me last, I've got a side question that I don't want to derail the actual conversation that's going on at the moment. So if I can get...
No, that makes sense.
Fine.
Councillor Jeffries, then.
Oh, thanks. The ANPR camera thing. I thought those systems you didn't have to have a barrier installed. I thought that was they were automatic on the way in and automatic on the way out. It just depends how long you spend within a certain area, because the school's got ANPR just up the road, and that's got no barriers. So that must be an automatic system. I think that's the ones
I think we're into the detail, aren't we, of different systems. Some I think have barriers automatically, some don't. There's different products out there of varying aggressivenesses depending on the operator.
Yeah, it was just a question of cost of setup, etc. Whether it was a barrier. There was a lot of talk about barriers and having to install costs, but I understand some of these are relatively simple with a camera and some signage, and off you go.
Thank you for that feedback, and I will pick that up with LED, because I think we need to bottom out exactly what it looks like and what it means. So that's part of the follow-up on that. So thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thanks. Jeff, I saw your hand was up, but it's gone back down. So if it was meant to be up, obviously shout. Otherwise, I'll go over to Tim, whose hand's popped up.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's just in relation to ANPR. We've taken advice from our car parks manager, who reported into the overall report that we as officers presented to our executive leadership team. So I was trying to use Copilot just now to quickly find that advice. It isn't as easy as I thought it would be. If it would help, because it is quite a technical matter and we have received advice on it, then I'm happy to circulate that to members of the forum if that's still, because I'm conscious we probably not quite answered that element of the question. So if that would help, Chair, I'm happy to arrange for that offline.
Yeah, I don't think it would do any harm, because I appreciate it's a technical point. I know the government's intent was to gain that these sort of really aggressive ones that the camera sees you happen to once glance in that direction, and that's the ticket because you've not paid for breathing the same air. But yeah, if we can get that detail out, then members are at least mind to put rest and knowing where we're going with this. Councillor Young.
Yeah, I looked into the camera recognition some years ago on behalf of the council, and it is right that as a district council we can't put cameras up. You would note that Cornwall are making half of their car parks private because they want to get this private company to put cameras in so their car parks will be more efficient. That's the reason.
Thank you. Councillor Smith, I think we're over to you to conclude.
I just wanted to ask a question specifically about the dual sites and the arrangement with resurfacing roads in and out, and what that looks like. And maybe a question that needs to be answered by others. But I'm intrigued because obviously we've got certain leisure centres at the moment that are a bit worse for wear in terms of entry. I'm thinking of Collerton could do with a bit of TLC. So I'm just wondering what the arrangement is there. And obviously that seems fitting in the fact that there's obviously a dual site in Honiton as well.
Thanks. You were Ian, right when you said you were veering off slightly on that one.
Sorry, yeah, no, it was.
I don't know if officers have got an immediate response. Or possibly I'm going to just leave them to dwell on it and maybe have a think if there's another item to come forward, or send an email, just because appreciate they won't have prepared for that as a question. But take away the question and you will get an answer. Councillor Rickson.
My comment is about number plate recognition and some of these operators in the marketplace. I hope it would be nothing similar to national car parks, because I'll be quite honest about this. I was caught by them in a car park where I couldn't. Does it rely on an app at all? Because I couldn't get it to work, and so left the car park. And then, if I hadn't contacted them, I would have been given a huge fine for leaving without paying. But I couldn't get the app to work. So I hope it's not going to be something along those lines.
I think Mike's taken on the feedback, and we're getting a report to us when whoever's decided, the determined strategy is decided, but they are very valid concerns about how some operators operate, shall we say. It's just a verbal update, that item, so there's not anything for us to take away in terms of voting. I can't see any other questions, so we'll move on with an update on buildings conditions, the LED facilities, and I think I'm back to George, but I've lost my script, so if it's somebody else, shout.
Chair, I think this one around condition assessment is actually with me, although I'm not one of the two joint authors, but in fact I was. So if I present this, and I can obviously bring colleagues in sort of if or when needed, if that's okay, Chair. Actually, just if I get going, just quickly respond on the dual use issue and access tracks. So there is no standard answer, so it will depend on the site. So generally, in terms of the building responsibility will either sit with us or sit with the school. Generally, it sits with us. Then there is an arrangement to recoup a proportion of the costs. Depending upon the circumstance, often the sports centre will be on a wider school site. So therefore, whilst the obligations for us, our building on the school site, will be for us to lead, typically you'd expect anything relating to the wider site to be the school, but possibly, depending upon what the agreement says, a contribution by us. Although, again, in many instances, the access might well serve the main, Collerton, as an example, might well feed the main school staff car parks. So, again, the leisure centre use might be such a small proportion that actually doesn't really factor in. So, having answered that, shall I now move on to the report itself?
Thank you.
So, okay, so this piece of work started with a recommendation from the 2022 Leisure and Facilities Strategy, which had a request to undertake a condition assessment of our leisure stock. It was also flagged up again through the Corporate Peer Challenge, early, I think it was January time last year, 2024. And then later last summer, we secured the budget to undertake this piece of work, and indeed to undertake wider piece of work around leisure, and indeed it then fed into Mike O'Mahony's appointment itself. So therefore we commenced this work sort of late summertime, on the basis that this condition assessment would then help inform strategic decision making. What I mean by that is the leisure review. It would also help inform capital investment planning, and also, well, we live in hope, I suppose, the opportunity to respond to any external funding opportunities that come through. In terms of the results of the survey, no surprises. You'll be pleased to hear. So it's telling us broadly what we expected, which is stocks well managed and that the future investment need is pretty much in line with what we've spent typically in previous years. When I say previous years, previous recent years. So therefore, in essence, we're keeping up to date with what needs doing in terms of investment in that stock. It's worth saying that it relates to, so the data, the numbers, the money relates to component replacement. So we'll look at a building and it will break down individual components of that building, both building fabric, so the building itself, but also mechanical and electrical. So we'll look at, for example, roofs, doors, plant, those sorts of things. And it will identify the condition and when they need those elements need replacing. It's not about improvements, it's about replacing. So it's when one of those components fails, it reaches the end of its natural life. So a roof, depending upon whether it's pitched, flat or other, will have different estimated life expectancies. What's worth saying also is that it doesn't, and I suppose actually, Councillor Smith, this picks up quite nicely on your earlier question, so it is directly relevant to this report actually. It doesn't include for external costs. So for example, the access road into a dual use site isn't included within these figures. So that's the segue into that item. It doesn't include, for example, outside facilities such as pitches. It doesn't include also decarbonisation or improvements that we, or indeed LED, might wish to make to the centres around sort of modernisation, service improvement, digitisation. It doesn't relate to those things. So it is very much looking at the building as it stands and looking at the condition of the components, when those components need replacing, the cost of those components, and obviously the condition they're in now, which will indicate how long until they need replacing. So that's sort of the context of this piece of work. I suppose there are probably two paragraphs which are the interesting one, the most interesting ones, which tell you the results. So paragraph 3.1 summarise. It's worth saying there's obviously a massive amount of detail that goes behind this in terms of individual components, costings, when things need to be replaced, in terms of condition, grade, individual components, and then what's on this table within 3.1 is a high-level summary of that. So we have all of those sites surveyed listed. We have the total 30-year forecast spend just on those elements that I've outlined. We then also have the 10-year forward spend. So you've got 17.5 million over 30 years, of which 10 million, just over 10 million in the next 10 years. In terms of categories, in terms of condition grade, earlier on in the report, we list what the categories are from A to D, A being the very best, D being the very worst. You'll, I'm sure, pick up that there are Bs and Cs. There are no, I don't think there are any As, no, there are no As, but I suppose probably more importantly from my perspective, there are absolutely no Ds. And the definition for a D would be a failure or a hazard. So yeah, none that fall into those categories. Within a 3.2, we've tried to sort of summarise what that table shows us. And in essence, you can draw this conclusion yourself, I'm sure. You look at those sites that have the most greens versus those that perhaps have the most ambers, and you'll see that in terms of condition, Exmouth Tennis Centre and Axminster Leisure Centre tend to be in the best condition, with Broadclist, Ottery, Sidmouth and Honiton Swimming Pool suggesting they're in the worst overall condition. Now, there's condition, but then that doesn't necessarily mean that something then needs to be replaced or replaced soon. So there's sort of slight distinction between those two areas. So I think I'm obviously happy to answer questions on that. And as I said, I've got colleagues, particularly George and Mike, who can come in and assist if needed. I suppose just one final note from me. There is reference within this report to the strategic leisure review, and we just need to be mindful that that particular item would be a Part B item. So in terms of this Part A item, we just need to make sure we don't sort of end up going down and getting into discussion around how this then impacts on that other piece of work. Happy through the chair to take questions.
Excellent. The table at 3.1, just checking my understanding of really reading it. So we've got the total spend for condition C and D ratings 3.1 million. If that, let's say we spent that 3.1 million tomorrow, does that mean everything becomes a B, an A on paper?
Yes, but we would still then need to replace A and B items at some stage. Clearly,
yeah.
A and B, it doesn't need replacing for a little bit longer, but yes, yeah.
But and then obviously we're saying, so would the 10-year spend, for example, would be plus. So we wanted everything for theoretically stay at that sort of A/B level. We'd need to spend 3 million tomorrow, say, for example, plus 10 million over the next 10 years. And then if for 30 years, and then another, or 17 million, or that 17 is including the 10.
So the 3 million being C and D, you'd expect to need to be done within 10 years. So that would be included within the 10 years. And again, the 10 year, the 30 years includes the 10 years. So it's showing in essence that we need to do more component replacement in the next 10 years. Once you've done that, then bearing in mind roofs, etc., last a significant period of time, then it reduces your spend profile moving forward. But as I said, there are no sort of particular surprises. If you look back at what we spend in terms of our capital programme in recent years, this doesn't sort of come as a particular surprise. But of course, we need to be mindful that within our capital programme in recent years, there's been quite a focus around health and safety compliance. So those items aren't necessarily, in some instances, will also equate to component replacement, but in other instances won't. So it's not quite a nice sort of mirroring that.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I think that's reflective of the fact we've got no Ds, and there's always going to be reactive work somewhere. Something always crawls out of the woodwork, possibly quite literally. But the idea is in theory, on paper, in pencil, we could say our capital programme of the next 10 years is that 10 million spent, profiled this each year, and we've kind of got our eyes a bit more open in what we're saying. On paper, very likely.
Yes. And within the detail that sits behind this, it sets out what is profiled to be required in each year. If we had lots of Ds, shall we say, then you'd have expected it to very much be what's often referred to in these exercises as catch-up works. So that would need to be done in year one. Now, clearly we haven't got that. Clearly we haven't got that here. But I suppose it's useful data, and it informs management decisions. However, it is only one set of data. So whilst this is useful, and the data that sits beneath this might say, for example, one particular site, we might need to look at the roof in 2 years' time. That would then be the prompt for our area building surveyors specifically to look at the roof and think, do we need to include that within the capital programme? It doesn't necessarily mean we would, because ultimately some things will deteriorate at a slower or indeed a quicker pace than envisaged. So this is a guide, but ultimately what will influence our capital programme moving forward is the inspections from our area building surveyors. Also, obviously, feedback from LED in terms of any issues in those buildings that will then come forward into capital bids.
Yeah, that's really useful. Thank you. Councillor Erickson.
My question relates to Appendix 1, capital spend. The total there is nearly 4.5 million. And just looking down the list, it seems that 2 properties only attribute to probably half of this expenditure. and that's Exmouth Pavilion and Exmouth Tennis Centre. Is that correct?
Yes, but bearing in mind these are projects that are already in train, are already approved. So yes, and we've had similar discussions through the BSCAP process. I remember them very well in terms of the heavy spend needed on those two properties. I think with the tennis centre, there was a lot, I'm just swimming through, there was a lot historically on the roof, and in terms of the pavilion, there was a lot around health and safety and particularly fire risk. But yeah, you are right. There's, and I say been because it's currently it's currently in progress. There's been a heavy sort of spend requirement on those two particular properties.
Thank you. Councillor Goodman.
Yes, thank you. Tim, look at it. Let's just look at the 30-year. It says 17.4 million, but that excludes inflation, doesn't it? So it's going to be considerably more than that. And are we confident, putting the Treasury hat on, that this sort of funding is going to be achievable from the finances of the council? Because even the 10 years, the 10 years is 10 million, the 30 is 17. Obviously, most of it needs to be spent in the next 10 years. So, but the 10 could well be 15 or 16 or 20 million if inflation, etc. It's just, all I mention that is that obviously we as a council have got to look at how do we afford that? How do we put the money away to make sure we got the budget? And what you said, I think, was really important. This was a stock condition. It's nothing about updating equipment in terms of it's outside, it needs to be improved for modern stuff, etc. So it could be considerably more than the 10 million, couldn't it? Thank you.
Tim, did you want to add?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I suppose there was a question in that and also a statement. So the question is, it could be more than that figure. Well, yes, it will be, because I'm sure inflation's only going to
absolutely
go one way. And the other points you make are all very valid. There were more sort of, I suppose, statements, but they are all very valid. And I suppose it goes back to the corporate peer review, which talked about the sustainability of leisure, indeed other areas as well. Moving forward.
Yeah, that was the point I was really making, Tim. Sorry.
Thank you. Didn't see any other questions on this report. Again, we're only being asked to note where the information is, so it's just for information purposes. So we'll move on then to final item tonight, which is Cranbrook Leisure Centre update. And Mike, is that your report?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Happy to introduce the topic. This is of ongoing dialogue. For the last couple of forums now, we've been given regular updates about the leisure centre. I think it's fair to say that there's certainly some momentum being generated into this, and that hopefully the update that you've got in front of you tonight will illustrate that. So we've appointed consultants to undertake a feasibility study, which is the early stage of right at the beginning, which is coming up with accommodation schedules, outline planning, what it looked like, where could it go, what could be fitted in place. And we're working through that at the moment with a view to finishing that around September. And underpinning that will obviously need to be some form of outline business case, rationalising the investment, the type of investment that's required. We're fortunate to be able to tap into some public estate funding to help us achieve that, which is reflected later in the report. I think the other key thing the message to send out is that I recall from the last forum meeting, there was quite a bit of discussion around when are we able to say something to our community? When are we able to share some of the progress that is being made? We have come up with a stakeholder analysis that we're working through at the moment, and that will generate a communication plan. And I think once we get that agreed by the project group and we engage with the forum chair as well, we would then look to implement that. But it's just been really clear that we're not setting off hares in different directions, and we're clear and consistent in our messaging and managing expectations. We're also talking to NHS Devon, and they're working at looking at some sort of campus hub arrangement potentially. We're trying to explore what is the art of the possible in terms of a shared front or shared use of facilities if we can. In addition to that, we're also talking to Devon County Council, and that could mean things like libraries or pub youth service and the family hub. So it's a tight envelope. It's just working out what it is that other partners are looking to bring into Cranbrook and how we could possibly work with them. I think the key coming forward is to the next cabinet meeting, probably in July, we'll start to put together a proposal that will look to take this project from stage 1 to stages 2 and 3, which is essentially detailed planning permission. So that is what we are working up at the moment. And alongside that, there'll be a number of other important documents, such as the project plan, the programme, governance, risk, all those other essential project documentation will start to come together. So I think once we've got that a steer on that, we'll be able to give a much more informed update to the forum about the sort of timescales we're looking at in terms of taking it through planning. And if we achieve that, what would it look like once we get affordability in place? What would it look like getting it through construction, procurement, construction, getting it built, and when it's likely to be open? So I hesitate to say any sort of timescales now, because I think we need to understand how we can take this project through to stages 2 and 3 in order to get to a point where we have a shelf-ready project that we can then share with people and with partners to get funding and so on. So happy to take any questions, but I think the main message is we are working through it, and sooner rather than later, hopefully we'll have some public messaging that we can share to give an illustration of where we've got to with this project. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Blakey.
Thank you, Chair. One observation, first of all, which is regarding communicating with residents. May I just please urge caution? We have a little bit of a history of things not quite happening on time in Cranbrook, and people have become very adept at complaining about how things never appear when promised. So let's be, please, 100% certain about what we say when we say it, rather than Mikey talked about managing expectations, something that we find ourselves doing an awful lot. And let's make sure that we are completely certain about what we're saying, and that there's no fluffy edges or guesswork involved. That's just an observation. I wanted to ask a question with regard to point 1.5, and it may just be my poor interpretation. Under 1.5, which is at the top of page 41, we're mentioning an addendum to plan to reflect current conditions, and we're looking at the possibility of duplicating the Cranbrook exercise in the second new community. Final sentence says, it should also be noted that the final facilities mix is not expected to include a forecourt sports hall. Now, can I just be clear that that would apply to the new community only, and that there is still expected to be a forecourt sports hall as part of the Cranbrook project, please?
Think, as I understand it, and I'm happy to take it away and to come back to you on that point, is that the forecourt sports hall was absorbed through the education campus that's been provided at Cranbrook, where they have sports hall provision, which is allows for community use. So that has become the de facto sports hall provision for Cranbrook. It's a balance. What we're trying to do here is that we recognise that when the second community comes on stream, we certainly need to ensure that there is some dry side, i.e. sports hall provision in that new community. What is less likely is that there's likely to be any sort of wet side swimming pool provision. So that's probably where the emphasis in this particular facility model is, to make sure that we got that covered at Cranbrook. And I think the dry side provision is an ongoing question, and I appreciate that sports hall in schools doesn't necessarily have access during the day, and it's normally accessible at evenings, at weekends and school holidays. But I think it's generally regarded as a de facto community facility that public can use during those times when the school are not. I think it's just trying to manage the assets as best as we can. Thank you. I'm happy for my colleagues to chip in if they've got anything they'd like to add.
Councillor Blakey, do you want to come back on that point?
Yeah, just to say that actually Mike has actually already commented that the forecourt facilities are not available during the normal school day, and that actually access to it is also restricted at other times in the evenings as well. So there is already, and will clearly continue to be, a shortage of court-based exercise and sports availability. So that is a concern. I do appreciate the difficulty with funding this. I know that we haven't got a bottomless pit to play with, but Cranbrook is really quite short already of sports facilities. There are many more that need to be brought on stream, and I think that this may, if we don't get some court facilities built into the new leisure centre, I think we could see it as a missed opportunity in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's an interesting point, because it becomes almost like a dual use site, but from the other side. So there's definitely some thinking to do in that area. Councillor Blocks.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I've got a number of questions, if I may. 1.1 talks about there's a governance strategy being developed and some stakeholder mapping underway, and apologies if I've missed it, but has that been shared with ward members or the town council at all? I've got 2 or 3 questions, Mike. I can see you eager to answer. Do you want me to go on with them, or do you want to answer them independently?
To be honest, I'm happy for you to ask all your questions, and I'll try and answer them as best as I can.
Thank you. We also talk about in 2.3 about the appointment of a construction contractor, and you talked about getting to a position for planning, but I'm well aware that funding, and that's already been mentioned, is lacking. So if we're at that stage, have we identified where the funding's coming from, which would then take me on to 3.5, read the Sport England capital bids, and have we got any specific funds identified from there? And there are any constraints, e.g. what are the timelines for submission for those bids? And finally, which is probably not one that LED want to hear, so put your hands over your ears, please. Have we approached private operators like Oliver Joseph and Pure Gym, who might be champing at the bit to come into Cranbrook, and we could just get on with delivering the much needed leisure centre? They're my final questions, Mike. You'll be delighted to hear.
Have fun.
Sorry, I think you're on
Mike,
mute.
you're muted.
Sorry, can you hear me now? Yeah, okay. Sorry about that. I'll try and answer them in order. The first one about the governance and stakeholder analysis, we will be doing that. We're just putting it together at the moment, and we just need to take it to the working group just to make sure we've covered all the bases and that we've got all the information together. And of course, the idea is, I did mention sharing it with the forum chair. I think you're right about ward councillors have some valuable insight into that as well. So I think I'll take that on board, and I'll make sure that that's reflected in how we take this forward. So thank you for that. The second one was about the appointment of a contractor and funding. I think that will be at the heart of the paper that is being produced at the moment. So we've been fortunate enough to get some funding to get us through the work we're doing at the moment, which is high level. Once we start getting into the more detailed analysis, there may be some sources of funding we can tap into. but I'm relying on my Cranbrook colleagues and officers to help me steer that. I don't know if Andy's in a position to give a bit more insight into the funding, and I'll pause for a second if Andy wants to chip in at all.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. It's always a bit of a dilemma, I think, in terms of progressing a project of this magnitude, that you end up in this slight kind of catch-22 scenario that you have to invest to get the project to a kind of what's described as shovel-ready or oven-ready position. And then and you have to kind of almost speculate to accumulate to get to that point, because unless you're there, you aren't able to access some of those capital funding streams that may make themselves or available or open up in front of you, if that makes sense. So we're in that kind of position where we think there's clearly a rationale as part of the initial acquisition of land, to move that forward, to really activate the town centre as well, in all sorts of ways, actually, in terms of footfall, but obviously in terms of the wider kind of health and well-being aspects as well. There's clearly a driver around primary care in here as well that everyone's acutely aware of, and there's an opportunity to craft a business case for a brand new facility. This probably speaks to your last point, Councillor Bloxham, around how does that kind of work in the locality as well, and what's the wider business case for investment. And just on top of that as well, I think the point picked up by Councillor Blakey was around the relationship also with the second new community as well. So that kind of context is emerging. And the point I think we're getting to is we need to take a pretty bold, pretty strategic position to invest in moving this facility forward. We need to explore all avenues for funding, including in relation to the Sportingdon Place pilot, which puts us in a slightly more advantageous position there. There can't be any guarantees, but I think what we can say to you is that unless we do this work, we won't be able to access those avenues going forward. And that's the kind of position we're in at the moment.
If I could just add one more comment. We are actually talking to Sport England as well with a placemaking manager and team, so that we are making sure that we are primed to be informed about any potential external funding opportunities, and just trying to make sure that we fit in with their placemaking agenda as well. Thank you.
Councillor Bloxham?
Yeah, can I just come back on that? Thanks, Chair. Are there any timelines for the Sport England? Do we need to get this bid in by the end of this year, next year, or?
At the moment in time, we've not been informed of any. I think they're reshaping their capital programme at the moment with a focus on the placemaking communities. So we are yet to hear a bit more detail behind that and what that actually involves. But we're alive to that, and we will try and make sure that we are in the queue, at the front of the queue, as and when such opportunities become available. But having the information and the evidence in front of us to present will help us in that order. Thank you.
Yeah, I thank you. I understand that, but I'm still not convinced. But thank you.
Thank you. Ollie, did you want to comment? Are you muted? You're on mute.
Is that better? Can you hear me?
Much better, thank you.
Great, sorry. No, thank you, Chair. I just thought it would be remiss of me to sit here after Councillor Bloxham sort of mentioned a competitor and sort of assistance from the private sector. Notwithstanding, we're going through the leisure options workshops, which you are all very much aware of. We have, and I personally have, sort of put demonstrated our interest in supporting EDDC in the development of a sports facility leisure centre in Cranbrook. Clearly, the current sort of, I suppose, scenario that we're faced with that makes that difficult for EDDC or us to sort of progress potentially. But we have talked about interim measures or facilities that could be put in and around the area, including Cranbox, and what could be done in sort of temporary shipping containers, which are projects that are done elsewhere. We've also actively offered our consultancy sort of services or expertise around the facility mix. So to the comment, I think Councillor Blakey about the sports hall, it's a very difficult decision to make because it's about making these facilities commercial as well as community focused. But of course, we've got a lot of experience around that, working with other operators and councils, I suppose, and have offered that expertise to add to the mix if required, wanted, or necessary. But like I say, we're going through this leisure options workshop with you, hopefully proactively, and that might dictate the extent to which we can get involved. But we've certainly put proposals forward to members and officers about what we could offer in that regard.
Thank you, that's helpful. Councillor Hookway.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to thank the Cranbrook Ward members for their input here, because I think there's been some important points raised up. I absolutely agree with you about the forecourt sports hall being linked in with the school and there being like another dual use site. I think that's something that we want to avoid if possible, because that certainly will restrict community access during the day to those forecourt areas, and that's something that I don't want to see. I want to see the community using those during the day. But so that's got to be worked out, indeed. And also, really, just to remind everybody, this is been a very long-term project. It will continue to be a long-term project. We need to do all this work to get it ready. At some point, local government organisation will kick in and have its say on this matter. But we absolutely need to make the case and also put forward the plans to make sure that this leisure centre happens, and that's, I think, the most important thing. The commitment to do it must be absolutely unshakable. Thank you, Chair.
Great, no, I fully agree with that sentiment. I don't see any other hands up. On that basis, then I think we can call it an end to the meeting. There is only another item to note, so I will bring the meeting to a close and thank you everybody for your participation.
Thanks, Chair.